Welcome to a fascinating interview. People have asked me how do I get my news on Ukraine, and one of the things I do read every night is a column by Annie Lee on the Daily Kos, KOS. And if you put a search in the search bar, if you put Ukraine, you will find quite a few satisfying articles about Ukraine and true fashion. And it's not relegated to one side or the other, but it gives you the fact. Now, on to the interview. Hi, it's November 29th. Welcome to North of 48. We're bringing back a guest we had on about a year ago, who currently lives in the Ukraine, based out of London as a freelance reporter, and past producer of shows like 60 Minutes and mainstream and freelance journalism. Welcome to the show, Phil. How are you, sir?
Good to be back, Walter. I'm good, thank you.
Well, I've been pretty anxious to get you back on and see how you're faring out with the war going on in Ukraine. I think we're 645 days.
Approximately, yeah.
Approximately, yes. And which is a shame. This war shouldn't be going on this long and stuff.
No, it really shouldn't.
No, it really shouldn't. So first question I want to ask you is, I've been noticing a preponderance of Russian-favored PR. Now, my algorithms on YouTube are slanting to people like this Danny Hepong, who has all these guys like the Duran and stuff. All these guys who have a different view to the Ukraine than I suspect you and myself, and the way the war is running. And I'm always fascinated by that. Like, well, maybe to name a few names is the turn of people like with the Gray Zone or Aaron Mate, and these guys. How do you? So I look at the situation. I think it's clear cut. It was an illegal invasion of Ukraine. They shouldn't have done it. But then I hear these other guys like on YouTube and some of the mainstream media still saying, like, having Russian flavored propaganda and stuff. I don't know if where you are, if you've noticed an uptick in that, but I've noticed also with stories like General Zaluzhny's interview where he said it was stagnant on the lines, and that created an uproar and people jumped on that. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think the Russians are kicking up their PR, or why?
I wouldn't call it PR. I wouldn't call it PR. I'd straight up call it information warfare.
Yeah, and why do people, given the same set of facts, have different opinions about this war? You know, that's
because of the manipulation. Well, I think in no small part because of the manipulation by Russian intelligence warriors, whether that's the GRU or the SVR or the Internet Research Center up in Petersburg. This is purposeful. It's well thought out. It's calculated. And it is seen on a number of strata. So you could even argue that Russia's participation in the warfare in the Middle East between Israel and Hamas, that the Kremlin had its hand in that. I am not one for conspiracy theories, so I tend to be careful with things like that. However, having said that, we know that Lavrov was meeting with the leadership of Hamas. We know that Hamas and the Kremlin have direct lines of communication and more likely than not, coordination.
They had the Iranian diplomats in there too.
Yes,
well, at the same
exactly.
time.
Sure. I mean, the whole thing, it's drawing the spotlight away from Ukraine. And I do not think it is a coincidence that just as the focus of the world is moving to what is happening in Gaza and in Israel, that there is this massive uptake of information warfare, both internationally, but even here domestically within Ukraine. In the last 2 weeks, 10 days, we have had repeated warnings from the intelligence community here and from other governmental bodies within Ukraine saying we're going to be seeing tactics that are meant to divide us internally here within Ukraine. You hear a lot of talk about tensions between Zelensky and Zelensky. We see a number of cells having been found in Odessa or out in Kharkiv of Russian or Russian allied Ukrainians instigating information warfare by putting things out in not only in Telegram channels or things like that, but directly trying to cause tension within political groups. For example, here, there's a movement right now that is disputing the crackdown on the Russian Orthodox Church here in Ukraine and the section of the Orthodox Church that is directly connected to the Patriarch in Moscow, Patriarch Kirill, who used to be a KGB man.
Yep.
So there's this discussion now happening in the Ukrainian parliament, the Rada, about how to deal with the Russian Orthodox Church. So all these things are relatively new. And I do not believe that it's a coincidence that this happens at the same time as the world takes its eyes off of Ukraine and switches it to what's happening in Gaza. I mean, I went up to the Press Hotel. So there's the Intercontinental Hotel, the Intercon here. It was the place where the press corps based itself. Mm-hmm. They'd set up positions for live shots if there were broadcasters, or that's where the kind of the New York Times would stay, or the Guardian, or if you had if you had the funds, you stayed at the Intercon. I was up there last Sunday, and it was devoid of the press corps.
Whoa!
It was a fraction. I mean, and I spoke to the people working there, and I said to them, you know, has the press corps left? And I don't want to throw these guys under a bus because they were very honest with me. And I'm not sure if the Intercon's management would like that, but they were like, yeah, man, we've been totally abandoned. We're empty. We're comparatively empty. We've been, you know, full. It's been hard to get a room here for the last, you know, near 2 years. But ever since Gaza, we're down to a fraction. So there's an information warfare campaign going on. It's very clear. And I think this uptick internationally, where we do see people who are supportive of Russia or who see this as a proxy war between America and Russia, and they lean more towards Russia than they do towards Washington because of, you know, American imperialism and America's interference globally and the wars, and there's lots of reasons to be upset with America. But the term is tankies.
Yeah.
I'm not crazy about that term.
No, but let's call
for better or worse, it is what it is.
Russian flavored. And
sure, Russian flavored. So you do see this at the Grayzo, but you've seen that from the beginning. I mean, I've had my interactions with Mate, and you know, there's others who I'm not even going to give oxen chew by mentioning them.
That's right. Yeah.
But they are pro Moscow, even if they don't know it. Mm-hmm. And more than anything else, they're anti-American. And what bothers me most about all of this information warfare that's going on is it constantly removes agency from the Ukrainians. Ukrainians are often seen as just this pawn that's being used on a chessboard. And what's not understood by these people, out of sheer ignorance, and this is, I'm not going to be polite about this. It's ignorance. They've never been to Ukraine. They don't know Ukrainians. They don't know Ukrainian history. They don't know the motivation for what happened, not only on Maidan in 14, but the motivation of what makes them fight as hard as they're fighting currently in this war. And so much of it is that the Ukrainians have decided that they are not a colony of anyone anymore. And they're not just, and I've said this to a number of people that I know in significant positions within, say, the State Department or other Western diplomatic organizations. We get them visiting Kiev now and again. And I've spoken to them about this. I've had other people give input back to me about this. And the more time you spend in Kiev and the more time you spend with Ukrainians getting to know Ukrainian and getting to know the Ukrainian power structure, they're not swapping one colonial master for another. You may think that I am being naive, but you probably think I'm being naive because you don't know Ukraine. I'm saying you in the general. If one believes that Ukrainians are going to swap one colonial master in the form of Moscow for another colonial master in the form of Brussels or Washington, they don't know Ukrainians.
That you can make a broad stretch. And while you brought Israel into it, couldn't you say the same thing about the Palestinians then? That they're
it's been a long time since I've covered the Palestinians, but yes. I mean, I tread carefully because
me too.
Because the Middle East is not my expertise. I've been there a few times to cover them years and years ago. I covered the Second Intifada, but I am not an expert on that conflict.
Okay.
What I can say is that much like the Palestinians are used by powers greater than the Palestinians themselves, that they are also a tool used by greater powers.
What a great phrase of putting it.
Where I really tread carefully is where I say the Ukrainians have made a conscious decision that they are done being a colony. This country, this land, these people have been manipulated by greater powers for centuries. Centuries. I mean, the last time they had proper self-governance and control, it arguably would be the 11th century, the 10th century, somewhere around there. You have to keep in mind, at one point, actually, Kiev was one of the top 5 populated centers in the entire continent. After the fall of Rome, and when Rome, not to go into a history lesson, but it's relevant because we're living history. When Rome fell, and there was the second Rome that was created in Constantinople, later Istanbul, this was part of that world. And Kiev was a massively powerful and populated city. That's why I have Olga. That's what that painting of Olga of Kiev. I mean, Olga was a titan on the European stage. Kiev used to be really, really, really important to the entire continent. It was, as I say, one of the top 5 populated centers on the continent. But that ended through a series of power grabs by other empires. And they've never regained it. So whether or not it was the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, the Ottoman Empire, and then, of course, the Russian Empire, this land has always been this pawn being used by greater empires, and not only for the land itself as fruitful and as such a great place for production of food, and this is the breadbasket of Europe. But not only for that, but because it's a great way to strike at other empires. It's a thoroughfare to attack other empires. And that's been their victimhood for centuries. And they finally have decided they've had a couple of opportunities in the last roughly century and a half. There have been a number of wars of independence that have been undermined and destroyed by various power, whether it was the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Russians, the Germans, who have you. They've always cut Ukrainians off at the knee and oftentimes betrayed them, and both East and West. And so the Ukrainians know their history very well. And they have decided no more. No more. We are a colony of no one.
Well, the way they're
and so that's why you get. Well, just let me finish that quickly.
Sure.
I'll finish my thought, and then we can move on to other stuff. But that is why I have heard repeatedly from delegations that have come here and tried to say, you need to do this or you need to do that. That they've gotten the Ukrainians get their back up immediately, and they're like, you don't tell us what we're happy to get your weapons. We're very thankful for it, but we're not your tool. We're not your pawn. We'll take your weapons. We'll fight our fight. We'll win this war, but then we're going to have our own country. And we need to recognize that.
Right. And, right there, that would justify what some people, Russian-flavored people, are saying, that Ukraine is a pawn of the United States and a pawn of NATO. I've never got that idea. I totally reject the idea that Putin invaded because of NATO incursion into the States. I think that's John Mearsheimer.
Mearsheimer.
Oh, I do not. Maybe he's a brilliant fellow. I've never met. Are saying in the internet that Ukraine is the pawn of the United States. And I think this shows that Ukraine is not. They'll take the weapons, like you say, but they won't kill their men en masse, right?
No, they're not like the Russians. They're not just going to throw men. They don't have the men to do that.
Right.
And also, they don't fight. They don't fight that way.
No,
they have a very different military doctrine than either NATO or Russia.
Well, I get into this argument once in a while. Well, look at all the men that Russia lost during the Second World War. Was it 20 million and stuff? I said, yeah, but you can't give
a chunk of those for Ukrainians, by the way.
And you can't give them a broomstick and say, go fight the Germans. You got to be smart about it. And I mean, thank God for the sacrifice, but I'm not sure it was needed. I could be wrong, but
well, no, I mean,
Russia fights is what
I've studied Russian military. Well, I've been eyewitness to Russian military doctrine several times in my life. I was in Georgia in 2008, for example, and of course, I've been here now since the beginning of this war.
Right.
And the Russian military doctrine is based on two things, and it's based on artillery, and it's based on conscripts. They have a vast resource of men that they can just drag out of the provinces, throw an AK-47 in their hand, and point them in the direction of the Ukrainians. It's not the most, and they don't have an emphasis on air power. Oddly enough, we're seeing the first use of effective air power right now because the Ukrainians have crossed the river, have crossed the Dnipro.
Yeah,
I'm sure we'll talk about that in a little bit.
I was hoping to, yes.
We will. I'm sure we'll talk about it because I think it's important we talk about it. But Russian military doctrine sucks. I'm sorry, I'm going to be a little bit on the crude side here. It's Russian military doctrine is awful. It's terrible. And it always has been. It always has been. If you look back in their history, they very rarely win wars on their own. They only, when they win wars, most of the time, not exclusively, but most of the time, they're part of an alliance. That was it was how things were in the Second World War. It was how things were in the Napoleonic War. World War I is a little bit different, but still, they're not. We have this mythology of Russia being this great military power. It's not. It's just that they have a lot of people, and they can throw wave and wave and wave of conscripts against an enemy. And that's what they're doing right now. This mythology that Russia is a great martial power is simply not true. Now they have nukes, so that comes into the equation, but they're not a great military, and really, quite frankly, never have been, with some exceptions. I mean, they got. I mean, look at the history of them in the 19th century. They fought continuous wars with the Ottomans, and we're, at best they got Pyrrhic victories. And as far as this NATO argument you brought up briefly there a moment ago, I do want to touch on,
Sure.
is that this has nothing to do with NATO. If it did, they'd be totally out of their minds about the fact that Finland has now joined NATO. They're not worried about NATO. What they're worried about is losing empire. Their sense of self and sense of identity is tied into Ukraine as their colony. This is the birthplace of their identity. So there's that in the equation as well. But it's not about NATO. If this war was about NATO, then why was there the first Ukrainian War of Independence right after the Bolshevik Revolution? Why was there a second Ukrainian War of Independence during the Second World War, which is, a very contentious issue because, a lot of Ukrainian resistance fighters would sign up with the devil, and did, in the form of the Nazis, because they hated the Russians so much. Why in 1846, for goodness sakes, and I know I'm going back into a history lesson here, but again, I think it's relevant. Why was the national poet of Ukraine, Taras Shevchenko, thrown into a St. Petersburg jail in 1847 because he dared to make fun of the Tsarist court and made a mocking poem that he wrote in Ukrainian? I don't want to get lost in the weeds here.
It's fascinating.
But this is
fascinating.
It's not about NATO. It's about one thing and one thing only. Russia's need to be an empire. Russia's sense of self as an empire. Okay, they have to hold on to Ukraine because it is their gateway to Europe, and it's their gateway to the Black Sea, and it is also a way for them to dominate another country, to expand the Russian Orthodox Church, the sense of Slavic identity that they are consider themselves to be the arbiters of. So look at Serbia. Look at all the Slavic nations that border along Russia, and how they decide that they are the arbiters of what it is to be Slavic, what it is to be Orthodox, all of these things. Russia is an empire and sees itself as an empire. And Ukraine is the cornerstone of their sense of self and their sense of identity as empire. They lose Ukraine, and they got nobody to look at but themselves. And if they start looking at themselves, and they all know it, trust me, I lived in Russia for 5 years. I drank enough vodka with the Russians to know after you put a few bottles in them, they'll tell you the truth. They're terrified of looking in the mirror because they all know the hard work that needs to be done to make Russia a sustainable, stable nation where power is not vertical but horizontal, and where the empowerment of the people terrifies the Russian elite. So that's why it's always vertical. So without an empire, without somewhere to look externally, and that's why they always look for an enemy that's external, whether it's America or Britain or other parts of Europe. They're really concerned about the Anglo-American alliance, but they always look externally, because if they start looking too closely internally, they all know that there's so much work to be done, and it's hard work. Reforming Russia which is something that needs to be done, is so difficult, and the people know that they will be called upon to be involved in any kind of real substantive change in their country and their culture, and they don't want to do it. They don't want to do it. They don't want to be involved in government. They don't want. They have a very similar attitude towards government that the guys up in the holler in Appalachia have towards a federal government. It's like, you don't bother me, I won't bother you. You leave me to my means. I won't bother you. You don't bother me, sort of thing. Well, democracies don't work like that. And if you don't, and if Russia doesn't want to be a democracy, well, then we go down that road too. But that's very problematic, because then how does the world respond to a Russia that is autocratic and, can on a dime at the whim of somebody in the Kremlin, whether it's a czar or it's a Putin, can suddenly, be very disruptive on a global stage. So they don't want, look at again, I hate to keep going into a history lesson, but we're living history. This is why this war is so important, and why we cannot take our eyes off this war, as much as the Russians would like us to do it. The Kremlin would love us to take our eyes off this war, but we can't. Right. Because we are living the culmination of a history in this region of who controls this stretch of land, this isthmus between the Baltic, the Adriatic, and the Black Sea. It's this crucial stretch of territory where empires have fought over constantly. We've fought 2 world wars over this, and we're desperately trying to not get into a third. But once this stretch of that territory, that triangle, is resolved, it's done. That stage of history goes into the past, and the Russians are terrified of it. So this isn't about NATO. This is about their sense of identity, their sense of self, and their sense of self as empire. And so we can't be fooled. We can't be gaslit, and we can't have the attention drawn away, because the Russians are right when they say this is an existential war. This is one side is going to survive this, and the other will have to fundamentally change. And if it's Ukraine that loses this war, because, by the way, something I believe will not happen, because I know the Ukrainian people, but let's say one way or the other, the Ukrainians, the West loses interest, the support goes away, Russia comes in here, and it somehow defeats the spirit of the Ukrainian people, something I absolutely 100% do not believe is possible. But let's say in some sort of version of the world that happens. Then Ukraine will change into, back into, or more into than probably has been in centuries, just a little Russia. It'll be little Russia again. There was a term in Imperial Russia where they used to just call it Malorossiya, little Russia. So it's existential for the Ukrainians, because the Ukrainians hate that. They don't want to live that way. They're European. They're not imperialists. They understand who they are and what their place is and what their culture is. They have no aspirations beyond Ukraine, whereas Russia has global and imperial aspirations. Sure. So if the Ukrainians lose, it's existential for them, because their identity will be destroyed. Moscow has made that clear. If Russia loses this war, then they will have to do the hard work of looking into the mirror and deciding, who are we? What do we want to be? If we're not empire, then who are we? And do we fall back into being just like the Muscovy principalities and what have you? So it's desperately important war. We have to I believe firmly in my heart of hearts that Ukraine is on the side of right, not only because as an American, I do believe in self-determination. I don't like colonial powers. I don't like empires. Right. If we didn't have the ocean between us and King George, how do you think things would have gone? And do you think we would revere George Washington? So when you have your imperial master right next door to you, and you keep trying to, and all he has to do is march. He doesn't have to cross an ocean, whether it's a czar or it's Putin. They come marching in, and that's why. And I'm not a fan of Stepan Bandera. If you guys know who Stepan Bandera is, he's the boogeyman that Russia likes to paint the history of, and his history has been clearly polluted and messed with. Still not a fan. I think he was an awful human being and a violent guy during a violent period in 20th century history. But do you think if King George had won, that we would look at George Washington or Thomas Jefferson, as heroes? No, they would be slave owners and whatever. King George would have, the British Empire would have painted them with an awful brush. Just as Moscow paints Bandera with this brush, again, not supporter of Bandera, but it's the same sort of thing, except their imperial masters are right on their doorstep. And they finally they finally said no more. And thankfully, heretofore, up till now, the rest of the world has said, you know what? Yes, we agree with you. Now, it's for a variety of different reasons. The idea that seizing territory by force of arms and colonizing it, and we never tried to make Iraq the 51st state, as far as I'm concerned. We did a lot of things. We've done a lot of things in recent history. The Americans have, but nobody's ever said let's make Afghanistan or Iraq the 51st state. Russia wants to make Ukraine just part of the Russian Federation. It's a vast difference. Anyhow, I tend to go on, and we're running out of time. So
I'm fine with it. So yeah, well,
did you want to talk about the tactical situation on the ground here a little bit?
Exactly.
Not that I want to. Yeah, not that I want to lead. Not that I want to dominate. But I'm looking at the clock, and I want to talk to you about so much.
Okay, well, let's do that. I was gonna mention that the Russians have increased their budget by 70%, which is 40% of their national budget.
Yep. While the ruble is collapsing.
Right, and however, they're making money on their oil for some reason. Those guys
illegally. Yep, illegally.
And so they're building up more money towards their military production complex.
Meanwhile, and meanwhile, the West is still not on a war economy. We should be.
Yes,
we're stepping it up, but we should recognize that this is and this idea of we're going to be with you until the we're going to be with you no matter what it takes. That has to be put away. That kind of mentality has to be put away. We have to start saying to the Ukrainians, we're with you until you win.
Yes.
We are with you until victory. And there must be victory here. There must be 91 borders, because if Russia gets even a taste of victory, if they even have and I'm worried about the land bridge and what we do about Mariupol, which is the city, which is at the top of the land bridge leading down to Crimea. And so much of this is about Crimea, because that's where one of Russia's primary naval bases is. And also Crimea is, again, this sense of imperial power. I argue, and I have done for quite some time, that when, not if, but when the land bridge between mainland Russia and Crimea is severed, and that is coming, and we can talk about that in a minute or two about the tactical situation we see. But why that's so important is because no Russian leader, and I've said this for a while now, and I'm standing by it, no Russian leader, and I don't care if it's Catherine the Great, I don't care if it's Nicholas or Lenin or Stalin or now Putin. No Russian leader survives losing what Catherine the Great, one of the titans on Russia's history, and the one who really, you could say both Ivan and Peter made certain imperial moves, but it was Catherine that made imperial Russia. And no Russian leader survives losing what Catherine took. None of them. Stalin, if it had happened to Stalin would have been in real trouble. Now, they've already lost Odessa. I've been to Odessa several times during this war. The Odessans hate Russia right now. And at the beginning of the war, there were those who were saying that Odessa was on the edge, because they're Russian speakers. They have a long-standing history with imperial Russia all the way through the Soviet Union, because it was their open portal to a warm water, trade route.
That's right.
So they've lost Odessa irrevocably. They're never getting it back. And they haven't recognized that yet, by the way. That's going to be a shock to the system. But when they recognize that Crimea is literally on the table, when it is inescapable that there is a very real chance that Russia is going to lose Crimea, Putin's going to be in big trouble. Already Putin has left Moscow. We have reports that he no longer is living in the Kremlin or in his palatial house, kind of on the outskirts of Moscow. No, he's somewhere at one of his dachas. He's either at his dacha down in Sochi, or he's at his dacha midway between Petersburg and Moscow. We're not exactly sure. He could be at a completely different, the man is perversely rich. He's one of the richest men in the world, no doubt. We don't know how much he's worth because Russia's economy is a gray economy, but he's not in Moscow. And he's not in Moscow reportedly. And I have sources within, I have a source within the Russian, I have a source within the Russian press corps. So I'm, take this consider my sourcing here.
Right.
This is not lock solid, but I have a Russian journalist friend of mine who has good contacts within the Presidential Protection Corps, which is basically our Secret Service. Mm-hmm. There are thousands of these guys. Right. And so it's no surprise that at least one or two of them is going to leak to the press. I have a Russian friend. He's an expat. He lives in the West, but he still has contacts with the Presidential Protection Service. Mm-hmm. And they said that he told me, after speaking to his source, that the reasoning behind Putin's decampment from the Kremlin is he's afraid of assassination. He's literally afraid of assassination. Things are not going well. They're not going well for the Russians, and I see in the tankies I will name this guy the Scott Ritters of the world, okay, who insist on looking at the situation through rose-tinted glasses that are based from a Moscow perspective, and he's wrong. He's wrong. The Russians are losing this war. So let's talk about what's happening tactically on the ground here. In Avdiivka, you have a very serious battle. So if you're looking at your map of Ukraine, Avdiivka is in the north. It's in the northeast of the country. Right. It's kind of in the Bakhmut area, and it's called the gateway to the Donbass. Well, that very well may be, but there are a number of different areas in that particular, because that's a very industrialized part of the country. And so there are all these travel hubs that go through, whether it's Bakhmut or Avdiivka or a number of Kramatorsk. There's a whole bunch of cities and towns out there where there are these spider web networks of roadways because it's industrial. Well, because if you're going from a foundry where you've smelted something and then you want to go take it to a steel factory, a steelworks factory where you can turn it into something, and then further take it to a place where you make it into rockets, or you make it into airplanes, or you make it into whatever, you've got to be able to move around. So there's all these roadways up near there. And so even if they take a place like Bakhmut, or they take a place like Avdiivka, then you could just go to Kramatorsk, and there's another network of roadways and arteries. And, I don't understand why the Russians are so fixated on this stuff.
Let's talk about Avdiivka.
But
another background.
Sure, but we can't forget about Kherson. But let's talk about Avdiivka. Yes.
All right. Avdiivka is, Russians are doing a pincer movement out there. Ukrainians have got a hold of the town, and they're defending it. And it's, again, like shooting fish out of a barrel. The Russians just send all these people, the reports coming out of the Institute for the Study of War, a massive amount of Russian equipment being lost. Why are they doing this? Why would Russia keep doing this, especially if Kremator is not that far away? Go protect that. Just curious.
I wish I had a better answer for you, but I don't know. I don't know either. I think the Russians have this very weird thing where they get fixated on a place. Mm-hmm. They did it in Mariupol. That made sense because it's the gateway. It's the entrance to the land bridge that leads down to Crimea. I kind of understood that. I never understood Bakhmut. Mm-hmm. But they get stuck into these meat grinders, And because, again, their military doctrine, which is just so anathema to ours, and is also frankly, if I'm maybe I'm being biased here, but having covered, I've been in a number of wars with NATO, and I've watched how NATO operates. Our military doctrine is better. It's just, I'm sorry, it's better. It's more effective.
No need to be sorry about it.
No, we the first thing we do is take control of the sky. We are now 2 years into this war, and no one controls the skies.
No,
that to me, that's crazy. To
but
me, that's the first thing.
Also shows, because Russia, with its amazing Air Force, can't take control of the skies either, right? So the Ukrainians have done enough.
Well, I think what it is. Well, no, what I think it is frankly, what I think it is when it comes to the air, and I've given a lot of consideration to this, and I will defer to others who are, military, professionals.
Sure.
I'm a war correspondent. I'm an observer. But guys, professionals might disagree with me, but it seems to me that the reason why they have not thrown their full air force behind this campaign is because they know that the Ukrainian air defenses are really quite good, and they could probably knock a good chunk of, and if this does expand to a war that bleeds beyond Ukraine's borders, they're going to need every single fighter, bomber, what have you, every fixed wing aircraft that they've got to fight NATO.
Right.
And if they expend it here, they could very much lose the vast bulk of their air force, because Ukraine's air defenses are really pretty good. And that's a result of the Soviet Union, by the way. The factories that built air defenses and missile systems, many of them were based here. So Ukraine's air defenses are nothing to be dismissive about. But at the end of the day, they also just have a different military doctrine. Again, their emphasis is on artillery, conscripts, and to a certain degree armor. But they do not emphasize, they don't emphasize naval power as much as they should, probably because of their situation. The fact that almost all of their deep sea naval ports are frozen a good chunk of the year, which makes them being a naval power, as much as Peter the Great has dictated that they should be a naval power, which is again why Sevastopol is this majorly important idea, and why Catherine in part took Crimea, so that she could get access to the Black Sea. That goes away. They call artillery the god of war, the Russians do. And then they just call up conscripts whenever they need them and chuck them against things, which is what we're seeing in Avdiivka. Now, cynically, what they also do is that they throw waves of young conscripts against a position. They then locate it using people. They locate where the strong points are, and then they attack, usually with artillery, but also with their special forces. That they're actually, well-trained and effective fighting men. They'll leave them in the reserve until they send these waves in, locate where the strong points are in the Ukrainian line, and then they put emphasis on that. But Avdiivka is a meat grinder, and they're just losing men it's just, and it is causing friction back home. We know that there are groups that are calling for, if not a end to the war, then certainly are demanding that their men are rotated through, so that they can come home and have some time off the line. And that's causing tension. That's causing tension internally within Russia. So
there was
all these tankies.
There was a story about mothers and wives wanting their soldiers to be rotated or come home. Which is what ended. Many say is what ended the Soviet involvement in Afghanistan, and then ultimately caused the demise of the Soviet Union. And then in the first Chechen War, I rocked up in Moscow a couple of years after the first Chechen War, but I was very well aware of a group called Soldiers' Mothers, who took to the streets, and Yeltsin didn't know what to do with them, which is why the first Chechen War ended with a peace agreement, which nobody thought the Chechens could fight off the rest of the Russian Federation.
but they did because women came out and said, we don't want our men being thrown against the Chechens and just slaughtered. And we're starting to see that now. So look, I don't know how this is going to happen, but I have no doubt in my mind Ukraine is going to win this war. Russia's going to lose it. And then we're going to have to see what happens. And also it will depend on how it shakes out. If the land bridge is maintained and the international community forces Kiev to abandon Mariupol, which will be disastrous for Zelensky. Zelensky will lose the next election if he gives up Mariupol. And he probably will deserve it too, because Mariupol
that's the industrialization of Ukraine right there for steelworks.
But not only that, Mariupol saved this country. Mariupol bogged down the Russian military for months, if you remember. Remember the Azov Steel factory where they just fought and fought and fought, and they bogged the Russians down there long enough so that the rest of the country could dig defenses, could train soldiers, could get more weaponry from the West, could do all sorts of things. There is a widespread feeling here that Mariupol saved this country. And there are internally displaced people all throughout this country who hail from Mariupol, and they're part of the fabric of the country now. With these displaced people who have their little, centers, internally displaced people center, where you can go and get laundry done, or you can go and get free food, or you can go and get even just community, because they're homeless now. They're living they're living internally within Ukraine, but they've left their homes behind, and they're omnipresent. Every city, almost every major city in this country, has a Mariupol center.
Right.
For Zelensky to, if the international community forces Zelensky to abandon Mariupol as a peace, as a negotiating peace with Russia, he will lose power. Right. He will absolutely 100% lose power, and there will be a movement to fight and take it back. I mean, it is. I walk around Kiev and there are posters everywhere. There are huge, billboards. Thank you, Mariupol. Mariupol, you saved us. This is the sentiment. If Ukraine gives up Mariupol, if Kiev gives up Mariupol, is forced to give up Mariupol by the international community, it will not go well for whoever is in power in Kiev. And that's why I don't think it's going to happen. And it comes back to this idea of, if you think we're just going to swap one colonial master for another, if you think we're just going to dance to Brussels or Washington's tune, you got another thing coming.
Right.
So I think that's still very much on the table. I think the whole idea of the 91 border is still something that Ukrainians are going to fight for, vehemently. And then also, as we're kind of running out of time here, I think it's really also important. And this is why it's so frustrating for me to see the press corps. I was a member of the press corps. I worked for CBS, I worked for Fox News, I worked for Al Jazeera, I worked for Sky News, CNN, NBC, ABC, you name it. I was a gun for hire. And I knew they were going to do this, and they have. They've abandoned this country because the next shiny thing has come along in the form of Gaza. And it frustrates me so much, because as much as we talk about how the spring offensive didn't work, and that's not true, and I wish we had time to go on into it in detail, but we asked the Ukrainians to do things that we would never ask our own soldiers to do. The landmines and the defensive infrastructure that was built because we dragged our heels in giving the Ukrainians the weapons to disrupt the Russians' ability to create defensive lines made the spring offensive damn near impossible to succeed with the objectives that they maybe could have done had we not dragged our heels. But now, as the world's attention turns to Gaza, the Ukrainians are on the left bank of the Dnieper River.
I was going to bring that up. Yes,
they have a toehold on the left bank of the Dnieper River. And when I say the left bank, I generally mean the eastern side. In military terms, you define left and right, because rivers tend to bend and snake. So you can't simply say east-west because it gets confusing. So military terminology, it goes, how does the river flow? And whichever way the river flows, the left side and the right side is based on the way it goes. And the river runs down into the Black Sea.
Right.
But they've moved down near Kherson, down near the Black Sea. The Ukrainian Marines have crossed the river and have set up a bridgehead, and it is moving out. It is under intense fire, and we have seen the Russians, especially in recent days,
they moved back,
pounding them. Well, they've moved back, but they've also been pounding them with Air Force. Again, something they've been very reluctant to do. So they obviously take it seriously enough to deploy their Air Force. But if the Ukrainians can continue to push out, much like Normandy in the Second World War, you take the beach, and then you push off of the beach and you keep moving forward. And the more you move out, the more you can backfill and get your logistics, and you can start really moving stuff across that river. We've seen Abrams tanks for the first time in this war. We've physically seen the Abrams, which I don't want to, we should not put faith in any one military system, but I've seen the Abrams in operation before. I've seen Bradleys, and they love the Bradley, by the way, and the Bradley is doing great work here. But the Abrams tank is in the fight, and those things are deadly. They will slice through the majority of Russian armor. So, and they're going to get the F-16s before too long as well.
Yes. Yeah.
There is reason to be hopeful that they will be able to cut the land bridge. And I'm telling you, Walter, when they cut the land bridge to Crimea, it will send a shockwave through Russia. It will change, because it will put on the table the threat that Russia will lose its empire. What Catherine took, no Russian leader survives losing. It will take away the naval base, and it will take away their access to the Black Sea. It will be devastating and a shock to the system for the Russians, and that's when Putin is really going to be in trouble. I could talk to you for another hour, but I have an obligation coming up, and I'd love to do it again. So I'd love to do it again, Walter. You give me a call another time. Let's not wait another year. But if you got something you want to talk about quickly?
Just quickly I will take you up on that offer, Phil. I love talking to you. You're a wealth of information, and your passion for Ukraine is something that should be seen more of out on the internets, right? It's the
that's why I'm here.
Of confusion from the Russian influencers. Yes. So I think my last question for you is, Russia did about 70 missiles, majority of them into Kiev. Ukraine responded back with 35 drones, causing quite a bit of damage. What's it like once these missiles and the alarms go off for you personally?
It's terrifying.
Yeah,
it's terrifying.
You haven't got?
Yeah, no, of course it is.
Oh.
No, you never get used to it. You never get used to it, and that's the intention. That's the point of it. Mm-hmm. The point of it is to terrorize us. They want us to be afraid. What the Russians don't understand is every time they do this, the Ukrainians, it only strengthens their resolve. They get angry. They don't get afraid. It's scary. It keeps you up at night. Sometimes when it's really bad, some more than others will go down into the shelters and what have you. But you go to bed at night knowing that if you sleep through an alarm and debris falls, on you, you get the luck of the draw sometimes. And if you catch it, you catch it. And that's just how we live. It's just how we live. But the one thing that the Ukrainians will not allow is they will not allow the Russians to terrorize them into capitulating and giving up on their freedom, because they know that if they lose this war, they don't have a choice, Walter. They don't have a choice. If they lose this war, it is their children, and it is generations, countless generations in the future that will live under the lifestyle and the way that Moscow dictates its governance. And that is a vertical power structure where everything is sucked up to the oligarchs through their proxies. It's basically feudalism, but it's all sucked up into Moscow, and they know their enemy better than we do, and they refuse to live that way. So they're not being terrorized; they're being infuriated. So I hate living this way. I hate when the alarms go off, but I'm not going anywhere, and I sure know that the Ukrainians aren't going to be giving up anytime soon. They're going to win. They're going to win. There's no doubt in my mind. They're going to win, and the world's going to be better for it. And you just watch. You watch when this country is free from Russian, I should say, Moscow oppression. They're going to spread their wings. They're going to be a powerhouse, absolute powerhouse on the global stage, certainly within Europe. So I believe in the Ukrainians. I know they're going to win. We cannot lose hope. We cannot lose our resolve.
Right.
I don't think we are. I think we're in for the long haul, and the result will be better. And even I think Russia will be better for it, because again, maybe they'll finally look in the mirror and make the changes they need to make.
Right. And the German Chancellor, Schultz, just came out and said it's an existential threat to Ukraine if Russia wins, but it's an existential threat to all of Europe if Russia wins. So
I believe that too. I think he's absolutely right.
Phil, thank you very much. You're a busy fellow. Thank you for any time. And if
I'm so sorry I have to run.
It's fine, my friend. And if we could do,
you drop me a line and we'll do it again. Let's not wait another year.
I got more questions, my friend. So thank you.
Let's not wait another year. Okay. I'm at your disposal.
All right. Well, you take care. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, my friend.
All right. We were just hearing from Phil, who's based out of Ukraine, for an update, and we thank him very much. And I thank you for listening to North of 48. Take care.